Hello everybody and welcome back to You Can't Win. This is Tom here and I'm joined by Don as usual. And today we have a special guest, Tiago. We're going to be talking about cryptocurrency in the year 2020. So with everything going on, like coronavirus and the protests and all the kind of crazy stuff happening, cryptocurrency markets have been going wild as well. And I guess if you're like me and you don't pay much attention to that kind of stuff, that may kind of slipped under the radar for you. So Tiago is going to be telling us a little bit about that and just a little bit about crypto in general. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your interest in this kind of stuff, Tiago?
So the first time that I seriously engaged with it, the relative to your definition of serious, was in Prague in early 2017. I was at this hostel that was across the street from this place. I think it was called it's like the Cafe for Crypto Anarchy. Some inflated title like that.
It sounds like something from a Pynchon novel or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And you go inside, and so the top layer is just a standard-looking kind of like minimalist cafe. The main differentiating factor is that you can only buy items in crypto, and so they have like a Bitcoin ATM right when you walk in. You know, I enjoyed the novelty of this, so I put in $20, and it prints out a. If you have either of you used a Bitcoin ATM before?
I've seen them online, but I've never
I've never seen one.
Engaged with one. Yeah.
So the way it works is that when you put in whatever your local fiat currency is, so 20, I said bucks, but I guess it would have been euro at the time, and it prints out a receipt that has a QR code and then a little hash that denotes like the public key for maybe the I can't remember, but like something that you could technically use to spend for online transactions if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a QR code that's then scannable that's denoted in the exchange for whatever amount of Bitcoin that you just bought. And then in this cafe, you can take that to the cashier who can then scan the QR code and then authorize a transaction. The summary is that I had spent $3 something on an espresso, got out, left it in my wallet as you're wont to do with little slips of paper for a long period of time with the $17 or whatever of change. Didn't really think about it until later that year with this being 2017. This is when the big Ethereum bull run started. And so I put in whatever public key, private key information to check on the status of the wallet and saw that had blown up to $80 or something hilarious. I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and so that was nice. And so I bought a VPN with that. And naturally, being in sort of like the tech adjacent world and also finding it kind of funny that was the case, I start to read a little bit more about like, why did this rise in value? Why are people starting to get interested in this? And then I started to read about Ethereum, which is kind of like, so with Bitcoin, I didn't want to get too much into the technical side of things, but generally speaking, the idea is that you have a bunch of people that are competing to mine blocks of Bitcoin, to like mine individual Bitcoin. And then as that happens, they also are collecting fees to authorize transactions from people, for example, like buying coffee in Prague or doing whatever people do with Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of it right now, I believe, is speculation, but I mean, this is sort of talked up and down, dark web, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so with Ethereum, the big innovation there was that they introduced a Turing complete virtual machine on top of that, which essentially means that you can not only authorize transactions, but you can also create arbitrary types of applications and make it so that like when these blocks are mined, they're also executing whatever scripts people have written for Ethereum, right? Whatever arbitrary stuff people want to deploy under. This is the sort of thing where like, if people want to like write in and talk about this, I'm sure people would have complaints about this explanation. But the summary is that it's like Bitcoin, but plus it does app stuff. And this allows people to create currencies and so forth. And this is another thing where like, because of being tech adjacent, I had heard about this, but I hadn't paid attention to it because it just seems like an obviously kind of not stupid idea. It's like a kind of interesting one technically, but it's like, I don't really get why anybody would want to use that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but this ends up being the basis for So you remember in 2017 that there were all of those like not just Bitcoin and Ethereum, but all of these like crazy types of different coins and tokens and currencies that are coming out that are supposed to be like, oh, this is the new Ethereum. And like everything started to explode in valuation, kind of like, 2000s .com bubble style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was all enabled by this. And so this is the first year that I had like a big boy job with some disposable income. So I'm not like the gambling sort, but I put in a little bit of money, and it seemed like it was just going up. And by a little, I mean like, enough to where it was like, if I lost it, it's like not a big deal, like a couple thousand or something like that, right? And yeah, and so, but a funny thing happens when you invest into something like this is that, so this is my first experience with like what you could call gambling. If you wanted to be generous, you could call investing, or I don't know, like speculation or something like that. I mean, it's like, whether you've got the sort of like Norm Macdonald death drive, like,
Yeah.
like letting it dwindle all away and having some sort of purifying abyss come from that. Or if you're just doing this sort of like Big Dave, like, make your day a little bit more fun, the number goes up or down, which is like kind of closer to me. You're still, because you've got like a stake in it, suddenly you're kind of like paying a little bit more attention to it than you would otherwise. And
Sure.
your brain starts to like, even if you're capable of having like otherwise you'd be able to have a big picture view of like, what's the point of any of this shit anyway? Like, who's actually using this? You're starting to pay a little bit more attention to, well, maybe this could go somewhere. Maybe this could do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that, so here's where I start to get a little bit into, I guess, the market psychology of this from a buyer end, is that in 2017, like the big thing was that because you had this novel ability to really easily make currencies at that time, you had all these things like one of the ones that I remember that just seemed so frivolous was like something that I think literally was called Music Coin. There was no real purpose to it, but it's kind of like how in the .com bubble you had like pets.com or like shoes.com
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, where you would just have like, oh, well, it's just a token for this industry. And if you think about it, music accounts for $1.72 trillion of whatever worldwide GDP. So if we just capture, 0.1% of that market, then that's a market cap of like 1 point whatever billion, right?
Yeah.
So it's always this like argument of like, if we capture whatever percent of whatever market, then, you wouldn't believe what the valuation of this is going to be in like however many months.
Sure.
A lot of this stuff was like obviously, or should from the outside seem kind of fraudulent. And like, when you were talking about this in the first episode you guys did on cryptocurrency, it was very much from like an outsider's point of view, because like neither of you you have the default, largely correct assumption that it's like most of this stuff, there's really no point to it, right? But there's kind of like this bell curve of interest that happens where like you know that before you invest. And then you put money in and then you sort of like see everything kind of go up gradually at the same time. And you kind of get the idea of like, I know it's kind of phony, but like, I don't know. Like if enough people are starting to, you know what I mean? You like your mind starts, that wheel starts spinning a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So, I got in quite late. I was pretty skeptical. I pulled out the moment it looked like the market was like going down. I was lucky enough to like have like broken even. It's and I kind of stopped paying attention for a while, and then I started paying attention recently, or I guess I should say as early as last year when around the time that you guys were recording this episode, because Facebook came out with this Libra token. And so this was the first or one of the first sort of like big examples of fintech coins that are coming out, of like decentralized finance is what they're calling it. Mm-hmm. So to give an example of this, well, I guess, there's two ways I could talk about this. The big picture is that like a lot of people who either they got burned in 2017, or else they like got interested in it then, but like they're kind of, I don't know. People coming from various backgrounds, like you can't just, it would be pretty unimaginable now to say like, okay, well, it's been 4 years and this seems like about the time when a bubble should happen. So let's do music coin part 2, right? Like you need to have some other pretext for why your coin is going to rise in value. And it can't simply be like, well, it's been a while and here's another coin for the pet industry.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
So what? But like at the end of the day, it's like it's the fundamental situation that like none of this stuff really has value or is used by the problem of digital, basically anonymous payments is solved, right? It's not the thing exists, you can use it. So yeah, you need to have some sort of like pretext for why this stuff is going to blow up again. And so this time it's kind of the overall trend in the industry, you might say, is recreating the financial instruments that you see in the conventional financial market, right? So that includes decentralized loans where you collateralize either against a cryptocurrency or against a fiat currency. That includes things like payment resolution networks, insurance. And this includes insurance against, because like all of this programmable money, this concept of programmable money I was discussing, it's like, obviously if there's a bug and you lose your money, then what are you going to do? So then there's all sorts of little wrappers around this, like insurance, or there's like a court-based system that I was wanting to get into as well. But yeah, it's basically like proceeding from the assumption that, well, eventually everybody's going to be using cryptocurrency for everything. And if you accept that as a sort of baseline, this is just the way things are going to go at some point, so it's valid to speculate, then it follows from that you would have demand for all of the things that you associate with like typical finance industry and fintech, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because it's like, so I mentioned very early on how my earliest, dim recognition of what any of this was just kind of like SA people making fun of Bitcoin for being, I don't know, associated with like libertarians or being philosophically silly, or some of the enthusiasts being a bit bullheaded or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But those true believers are still around. Like that Crypto Anarchy Institute in Prague, I'm sure is, if not still open, then it's like that subset of people still exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got this whole new audience of people who are driven in this, like, I mean, if you wanted to be fancy, you could call it like libidinal way and toward, like, obviously on some level they need a pretext for the currencies to, or for these things that they're invested in to all rise, right? And so that pretext is all of these financial machinations that are totally counter to the entire idea of having decentralized money in the first place. Like in other words, like I guess the way that I'm thinking about it is that, like, it's funny because you now have these ideas where the assumption is that like cryptocurrency is going to take everything over, but then you have these internal contradictions with these new products that are are going to be the basis of the new financial infrastructure. And to give an example of that, what I mean is, like, you've got a range of, so like Facebook Libra would be an example of like a new DeFi stablecoin that's supposed to algorithmically self-balance its value, not against the USD or against the euro or the pound, but against a basket of currencies, and ambitiously maybe even like a basket of commodities, like the price of oil or butter or whatever in developed countries, right? Mm-hmm. And then they put this on they put this on like WhatsApp, they put this on Instagram, whatever. They make this like their default like Facebook way of payments. And then all of those services become the Western, well, not Western, but like the Western sphere of influence version of something like WeChat. And then because they have enough market share in India, this like starts to bank the unbanked. And now everybody's using this decentralized, but heavily Facebook influenced currency, right? Mm-hmm. And then the idea would be that, like, once that happens, then suddenly you're going to need not just financial instruments, but also because of these weird technical problems with the blockchain, like, for example, the fact that like you can't refund transactions, which is like a really basic part of having a functioning currency generally. Mm-hmm. You then have to create all of these technologies like decentralized courts for purchase resolution and like insurance for when your smart contracts fail and so on and so on. But it's funny because there's a contradictions where it's like, okay, so you want to you're interested in decentralized currency because you want to remove centralized control and eliminate the middleman.
Yeah.
And you presume that like this is like how we're going to get a borderless form of currency. But then in order for that to function, you need to, in order to like not have middlemen, you need to recreate the middlemen, but in like a decentralized way where now you have the same fees that you associate with all of this. So basically it's just like you're building this really bizarre abstraction layer that presumes success because of not having the things that you're building, basically, but that also need the things you're building in order to succeed.
Sure.
And so it's funny because it's like, it's this, I mean, you mentioned Pynchon earlier, Tom, with the Crypto Anarchy Institute, and it's like this sort of like Pynchon level of just like arcane absurdity, self-defeating types of like multi-layered, like patching your system with the very things that were the reason for the system to have existed or what its benefits over the existing were. So, I mean, I know these are sort of like people have been making these points since Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more generally started to get their more ardent enthusiast. But it's funny now because like we're still seeing the same types of bubbles and the same types of like maniacal moments of enthusiasm. Again, as like somebody who's like kind of, you know, adjacent to the tech being built, you look in tech circles and like nobody's talking about this stuff. So it's all people that are in this weird myopic, you know, mania around building up the ecosystem as much as possible and like not having the ability to allow themselves the, you know, a moment of big picture zooming out, like what's the point of any of this shit?
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost like you've got you know, they're building up this one sort of central basic institution in something like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And then, you know, the obvious pointing out to it is, well, you need an infrastructure and apparatus that can kind of handle all of the processing, you know, like the cases around it and all the issues that come up with this kind of thing. And, you know, the whole push with this in the first place was because that apparatus that in different ways, like the state and the central banks and all that, you know, there was a lot of skepticism towards them and a lot of, you know, belief that they were outmoded by technology and that. And now we've kind of gotten to this thing of people saying, yeah, the new ecosystem is, well, okay, we'll just, if we need to have these institutions and apparatus and stuff, we'll just build them into the currency somehow or around it. And that's kind of, yeah, it is. It's true. It's funny that like that whole move is almost like, well, then, you know, what is the actual gain here of this new system other than really, you know, in some sense, maybe alienating it from democratic control or something like that kind of thing, like in terms of Facebook and stuff like that. So how has Facebook's project been going? I don't know what's the status of that. Do you know what's been going on in the last year or so with that? Or
yeah, that's I don't want to say it's failed, but I don't see any way that it could possibly take off because as soon as they announced, there was kind of a fervor of interest just because of their stature. So, you had tech people that were kind of looking into it. They had this sort of interesting stack and all of that. And just, and also they had all these partnerships aligned around them. So like part of what the appeal of that was supposed to be was that like there was all this initial hype around like PayPal and Visa and MasterCard and Stripe and Goldman Sachs, like every sort of, you know, traditional financial, you know, blue chip company you could think of, and everything having to do with like digital payments was aligned with them. Mercado Libre in Argentina was, so there was speculation around like, oh, this is just going to like solve the inflation problem in countries like Argentina and Venezuela overnight. Like they're going to get all this market share. It's going to be built into their apps, etc. Which I know isn't directly answering your question, but where I'm going with this is that like within a month, because of the amount of attention it's got, Germany and France immediately said, yeah, as soon as you launch this, we're banning it. So good luck with that. And then PayPal pulled out, Visa and MasterCard pulled out. So like they lost everybody who was supposed to be aligning with them on this. So,
Yeah.
and then they started to drastically scale back the like I mentioned earlier, that they're supposed to be self-balancing against all these different currencies. And I believe now that they've scaled it down to like, well, we'll eventually have stable coins against the USD or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of just, you already have Facebook credit. So it's just that's what that is, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
So they could launch it, but it'll probably look more or less like, I don't know, the way you already pay for stuff on their network.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that you do. I mean, it's not necessarily unhealthy to see sort of this grasping that happens in any sort of new field with tech and all that kind of stuff. Like you see, like, you know, people kind of have to come up with business plans and kind of throw them together. But it is hard because I just don't see what it is. It's the universal adoption thing that any small business owner comes up with in their first business plan, you know, like if I sell this fly swatter to 300 million Americans once each year or something like that kind of thing, then, you know, I'll be a billionaire pretty soon or something like that. So I think you're right that there is that sort of like adoption mindset that seems to fund a lot of these or like underline a lot of these projects. But I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me is you're talking about from, you know, the buyer perspective and stuff like that too, is that I see people talk about this kind of stuff online sometimes. And I only have like the 101 pretty basic economics degree level of like finance knowledge and stuff, but I can kind of tell from what's going on is there's a lot of like, first, of the ways that they could be doing it, you know, the sort of value side of it doesn't really exist in the same way because it's just completely wild estimates on a lot of this kind of stuff on how value these things are going to be in the future and stuff. But I see constantly the charting kind of stuff going on, where people say, oh, it went up like 5% today, so that will probably mean it'll go up 5% tomorrow. So, you know, like they come up with these very elaborate sometimes or very simple things, and it seems almost completely based on intuition to me. Like I don't know, like how much of the industry is that. And then, I mean, you do see like everyone still makes fun of the people that are, you know, posting the memes of like the Joker being like, you didn't trust me on Bitcoin, now you won't trust me on this or something, you know, like the sort of quick, you know, get rich quick people. But there does seem to be a large thing, and it seems to be merging with more typical kind of investing too, where you have these new apps and stuff, or like, you know, becoming popular like Robinhood and all that, where you just have millions of people gambling with money that really is technically borrowed, probably for a lot of them. Like they have student loans and all this kind of stuff that they're, you know, like it's not money that is just free and clear for them. So I don't know. That just seems like a weird ecosystem that it's talked about a bit, but it doesn't seem to be like, I guess because it's personal responsibility and it's like still for most people, the stakes are not high enough that it's not like going to bankrupt them directly. It just seems like a strange subculture now or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's very much a subculture. I haven't paid attention to any of the like Wall Street bets or, you know, like new wave of Robinhood retail investment stuff, but that seems very, very similar to me, where it's what you've touched on basically is that you have people that were not maybe they've got a little disposable income, and that could even just take the form of stimulus checks, which frankly is probably part of like the current wave of there being a bubble into this or Tesla or whatever else, right? It's like people having money, they're bored, they have to be inside all the time, so they're like looking at a screen, which naturally, you know, kind of gets you leads to certain types of behavior. And, you know, they're freaking out. They're reading like zero hedge articles about the dollar exploding tomorrow, and they don't know what to do. And then they you know, throw it into Tesla or some, I don't know, payments resolution token that's supposed to be the wave of the future. And then they see it go up 5%. And then, like you said, they have some they read somebody else's trading view window that shows that like 5% is actually like a parabolic indicator when you consider that yesterday was 2%. And, you know, and they've got no background in any of this shit. And I don't mean to insinuate, by the way, that it's like, you know, they're not smart like the real finance guys or whatever. I mean, it's like you could make that argument, and it's like I don't want to make a sort of an equivocal, you know, nobody really knows anything type of. That's not exactly what I'm saying, but you do end up with a weird sort of subculture around it because it's people that are that they're really like driven toward a common goal of like making it or paying off that mortgage or whatever, and they have no actual grasp on how any of this stuff works.
Sure.
Yeah.
And just to intervene there, like you're saying with that, a lot of these people could make money too. It's not like it's not some like rule that it's like just going to all evaporate into zero for everyone. I mean, there's people that's, as you were said about the original Bitcoin, like sort of people around that, or the anarchy place still being open and all that kind of thing is like, there are people along the way that make a fair amount of money. There's people that maybe make a loss on, this transaction or that here and there and stuff. And the thing that is interesting to me is just that ideology part of it, like that whole, this whole subculture operating around principles that they don't really grasp and how it doesn't really aim in one particular direction and stuff. Because it kind of reminds me of like almost some of it, and that's why it was so funny at the start with the libertarian kind of stuff was, like with the sovereign citizen kind of thing and all the weird court rulings that you can kind of try to achieve and stuff, where those people sound crazy until like the day that the Supreme Court says something like Citizens United or something, and it's like, oh no, money really is speech or whatever. Like there's like these people that are on the fringes, but they may well be in powerful positions later on, or at least be able to sort of translate that or something into some way. Like, Elon Musk might be seen as a buffoon by some people now, but it doesn't necessarily end in the classic pride goes before the fall narrative for everyone. And I mean, with someone like Trump, you can also see that the pride before the fall stuff doesn't necessarily mean that other people are going to be okay with the fall too. Do you know what I mean? Like, It's not just something that you can kind of look on from a distance and laugh at a lot of the time, because it's more complex than that. There's not the, as you kind of said, there's not the, emotional, there's not the catharsis maybe sometimes that you want from looking at these things and saying, oh, it's just dumb people thinking about dumb things and stuff. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of it's an odd little microcosm of the stock market in its current, I guess its current state as well. But I guess this goes back to, again, I don't want to be totally equivocal, and I have to concede myself that I'm one of these people that like doesn't come from any type of like that it doesn't come from a grounded financial background to where I could even make those types of comparisons. But you just sort of see what's going on with rampant speculation from retail investors in what have become meme stocks like Tesla or any of the big blue chip like tech stuff. And it's not like that's foundationally that different, where like everybody, I mean, there's a sort of like common grasp that this stuff is overvalued, but also most of the people that are buying it like know that, but like don't know what it would mean for things to be properly valued. And then it gets de-anchored from what that, like how the market, so to speak, or this reified idea of the market should behave. But then it's not like that money evaporates overnight, like Don said. It's like, I mean, there are still people that make money off of this. It's still, it's not like it's one day everybody wakes up and then realizes that it's like absurd, and then like money just no longer. I think there was like an Onion article about that one time, like everybody just suddenly realizes money doesn't make sense, and then chaos disintegrates. Society disintegrates.
Yeah, I think an easy example with that is for housing and stuff, where in Toronto there's always I would say for at least maybe since 2008 or at least, but before that too. There was articles every year about how the Toronto housing market's a bubble and it can't be sustained and stuff. And there was like on Something Awful, I remember there was a lot of people that would post about how they were saving up their money basically just in savings and waiting for the market to crash before they bought a house and stuff, and just kind of coasting along and being like, oh no, we're going to kind of make do now because we're waiting for the price to drop maybe 20% or something, like some thinking around that. And it never really, basically they never got that result. They never got that result that they wanted, because prices just kept going up, or at least maybe for a bit, stabilizing, leveling off. But like, it's the market timing stuff that's like, the whole John Lennon thing of like your life is what happens while you're making other plans or something like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to have to, it's very, very easy to look at something and say, oh, that looks, overvalued, or that looks like a scam. But, it might be 20 years passes before the sort of historical cycle goes through whatever rigmarole it has to get to the result that you expected or something. And that's all that matters, is really being able to guess what timing, if it would happen then, or really other than just seeing the thing. I mean, you get that with anything really in politics and stuff too, where, people kind of make these grand claims, and then it might take 100 years for that actual trend to kind of culminate the way that you thought it might or something. And then it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Just to quickly go back to that point about the Toronto stock market and people just sort of saying, I'm saving up until da-da-da. That really resonates with me, because during that period I was talking about, when I first put a little money into Ethereum, that I was aware of the Boglehead's philosophy and, index funds, passive investment, all of the ways that you're supposed to invest once you're when you're seriously thinking about these things and how to make money over the long term, and not trying to time the market and stuff like that. But this was this is after 7, 8, I guess 2008. So this would have been 9 or 10 years of, it was at that point where every year for the last 4 years, it's, a recession's supposed to be coming around the corner.
Sure.
And now, I don't want to do the hyperbole of the world as ending, but if it was going to happen, it should be happening now. And not to suggest that there's not a recession, but it's it's still the case that at any point when I could have invested in an index fund, it's not like that would have been the big precipitous drop that would have made the perfect entry point. There's no falling knife to catch so far. The closest thing you had was stocks kind of dropping off, and that's not to suggest that it won't happen, but it's really hard to. It's and I think that's part of the appeal of things like crypto or putting money into these Robinhood stocks, is that even if you're the type of person who, now people have more access than ever to these perhaps platitudinous, but still generally correct ideas around passive investment and how to build money for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
But it's it seemed for long enough that the market should have some type of major correction, to where it feels oddly safer in a way to just put money into something that's a little bit of money into something volatile. And then if you lose it, then it's oh, well, fuck it. That's, I'm waiting for the market to crash anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think of it in class terms or something like that too, there's a lot of people that they might just be busy with other things too, and not really, they're not really super focused on their money. I think that there is this layer of people though that are, they're very much at risk of falling out of the middle class, or falling out of the sort of upper middle class or something like that, where they're a few bad years of income away from not being able to retire how they want to and things like that. And if you tell them, okay, well, your gains in investing are constrained in some pretty heavy way, the Boglehead sort of index fund kind of thing that you're talking about, it's not, you get maybe this steady growth, maybe if things continue or whatever and all that, right? But people are afraid of things collapsing in some way, or them being the one left out. And I think that the thing with anything like this, anything with the day-to-day trading kind of stuff, and that is that, or these exotic sort of things, is that it gives that one. It's that lottery ticket mentality or something like that too, where it's well, okay, as you said, put a little bit maybe of it into this, each person, or a lot for people that are heavily committed, and if it hits off, then that solves all your problems. You don't have to worry about that kind of thing, right? And then in the future. So I think that it's one of those things where they always say that middle class people go for astrology and stuff the most, or something like that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's I don't know, because at the end of the day, for me, it's the ideology of it or something like that, because there's other ways to solve those same problems without having to depend on these financial instruments or something like that too, right? In terms of just beefing up public pensions and things like that, or whatever. There's other strategies other than just, the individual themselves making the right bet or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been barely hanging on here, but I think I get what you're talking about. But like my basic attitude towards anything like that is just like I want to make the safest sort of bet on anything, and like as far as like Sharia principles and all that kind of stuff goes,
Yeah.
Tiago, you and I were talking about this a little bit in the Discord a few days ago. That is it halal or haram or whatever, and I'm not qualified to say, and you're not qualified to say, but to me, it just seems like the kind of thing that I shouldn't be really any like really high risk sort of like speculative kind of thing is not what I should be doing. And I think part of that is that psychology you were talking about of like once you put a little bit of money into it, you start to the gears start turning, and that's what you get interested in. You start thinking about like, oh, well, they could go up a little bit more tomorrow, and like you start paying attention to all that kind of stuff. And I just think that I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world, but I do think that part of the kind of warning against that kind of investment and whatnot, I think there's some element of that sort of thinking being somewhat of a negative thing. Like it's probably not the most positive thing, because you can get carried away with it pretty easily.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's way more powerful than you'd want it to be. Because I mean, to reiterate, I've never like put a substantial amount of money into any of this shit, but you put in a little bit, and you've got enough to where like you feel like you can fill out, like pad 15 minutes in a podcast or whatever from just like passively paying attention. So which shouldn't be possible, because like if going into it that this doesn't. Like none of this makes it, like if your perspective on it is basically the same in the broad strokes as somebody who hasn't put anything into it and it's just sort of like, that seems kind of silly to me, then I don't know. It's a little disturbing to see the way that, your incentives and all that stuff sort of like starts to align and spark off in your brain.
Okay. So you want to get into questions, or are you guys okay? Or
yeah, let's
do
some questions here. All right, let's start with this one. Is Don as nice a guy in real life as he seems? Yeah, he's as nice as he comes across on this podcast. I think this is a really good, from my perspective, this is sort of like what he's like to hang out with. Yeah, we've hung out a few times. Don has visited and stayed at my place a few times. Haven't done that in a while, obviously, with quarantine situation and all that kind of thing going on. But yeah, he's a good dude.
Thank you. Although, I have to admit that sometimes I can't turn off my trolling device or whatever, and then that can ruin someone's mood. But like, for others that would be more of a thing. Sure. But like, I think with us, we have a dynamic where we're always sort of doing that, and so that's like fun, and it's just sort of like jokes. Yeah. That's my one caveat for that. Otherwise, I accept all praise.
All right. Why people defend animals of extinction but do not defend the species that risks extinction the most in the last 200 years? The white race.
Oh, okay. So it's this guy again. Well, I hope it's one guy. I don't know.
You know what? I think it is that guy, because there's 5 messages after that say Muslim Tom is race traitor. So that's
okay. Yeah. I don't know. It really is last 200 years. I feel like hasn't. Oh, well, I was going to say the white population has probably gone up like a huge amount in the last 200 years, but there was like that blip in the middle of the 20th century, I guess, where like, I don't know. Maybe does this guy consider
it depends
Slavs
if you
white?
consider those people. Oh, you're talking about World War II, right? Like, I don't know if we consider them white. That's a whole separate
Slavs
debate.
Too, but yeah, we'll hold aside some of the more controversial parts of that, and then even then, it's like Germans. I don't know, 20 million or something died. I don't know. So I guess so, but that's kind of, I don't know. That seems more like white on white violence. I don't know. So
yeah. Well, I think even counting that, the white population has gone up. I think the general human population has gone up, like however you slice it.
Sure. So I don't know. This is just more whining. We can't, accept this. Just go have, your family, whatever.
Yeah. Whenever this claim comes up from white supremacists, it strikes me as, because effectively it's like a numbers game where they're complaining about other populations having more children, which it seems like player hating to me. It's like, I mean, like I get that part of the idea is that you're trying to encourage your own, what you imagine to be your own community to have more kids, but I don't know.
I would like to suggest that if you are concerned about such things, there is some religions that offer you multiple wives that you could, bear children with multiple different women at once instead of just one. So that's something to consider. Can you please make some more memes, Donald? I like them very much. I think everyone likes Don's memes, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking just one person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoy some of my favorites that you've made, Don, are the comedians doing various forms of religious memes. Like
yes.
like Chris Rock riffing on Zakat and things of that nature. So if you want to bring that back, those are a lot of fun.
Sure.
I think you've done a few of those like poems, like where it's like, it's set up to look like a poem, like Sylvia Plath or something, and then it's like Avril Lavigne lyrics or whatever.
Yeah. Those ones good too. Yeah, I kind of moved away from it because it's pervasive now, kind of thing. Like in 2015, it made sense maybe for me to do, like, I don't know, Mao singing, Billy Joel, whatever, something. I don't know, just like taking from two things and then just mashing them together. But I feel like that's like 90% of left-wing posts online now. So kind of I've moved. I don't know. I don't have to contribute to that as much, but yeah, maybe I'll work on the old religion ones again. Yeah.
I don't know if this qualifies as a meme, but I was sad when you retired your bit of Louis C.K. secretly having a hand in everything that happened in every new script, every new Marvel movie,
yeah. Like he wrote Black Panther and got yeah.
It would kind of make sense after Pootie Tang, I guess.
Yeah,
it's the natural progression. All right, here's another one for Don. About Don, I should say. Why is Don a Habs fan and not a Leafs fan?
Well, I lived in Montreal for about 4 years total, and I only lived in Toronto proper probably about like a year and a half total in my life. And it's funny to me because everyone around me growing up and in my family and stuff are like, diehard, lifelong Leaf fans. So just being contrarian, I had to be a Habs fan. And I don't know. I'm sure if I lived in Montreal again for any length of time that I would immediately get annoyed by all the Habs fans. So I'd have to become a Leafs fan, I guess. I don't know how that works, but yeah.
All right. Do creatives make better art when they're depressed and or addicted to drugs?
I don't know.
So I think you got to go on a case-by-case basis because there definitely are people who were better when they were like on drugs. Examples that come to mind are like Lil Wayne and Gucci Mane. But I don't think that's a good like principle to just apply generally because I think a lot of times, I mean, if you're thinking about like, say for yourself, like if you're someone who's making art, I don't think you want to get in a mode of thinking where it's like, oh, I have to continue my drug habit because that way my art will be better. Your art probably sucks. Just 99% of the people that do it suck at it. So don't like maintain a drug habit so that you can kind of like delude yourself into, my art is good or whatever. You have to be good at the art in the first place. I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then there's tons of people that make worse art when they're on drugs and stuff, I think, I
think people also tend to, I mean, we're all naming musical examples, which I think is, it makes sense. But I think people tend to ascribe to, they ascribe responsibility to people's drug habits when really what's happening is that people are taking drugs because they're younger and in a certain part of their career and they're depressed or whatnot because they're, I don't want to ascribe, it's hard to generalize here, but to give it like one of the examples you listed was Lil Wayne, where you could say that he made his best stuff on drugs, but he also, did Prom Queen and started doing really corny, just whack, bizarre lines. It's just all like his career also totally dovetailed the more lane that he was doing. It's not like you can just say that that was a superpower, and then it seems like that also kind of like drove him off a cliff.
Yes,
so
that's true.
I'd just as quickly ascribe that to him having whatever unique talents he had, and it's hard to distinguish that from he was just a driven person who that was part of his that was maybe an accoutrement to his success of what he did, but ascribing it to his success was. Yeah.
And then there's musicians are an obvious one. It's a good point that you bring up that we're talking about musicians, because I think it's just part of the lifestyle that people tend to have when they are like musicians, touring all the time and kind of you just get involved in a lot of that kind of stuff. So that's the obvious go-to. But I think there are also a lot of musicians who maybe they were doing things or whatever, but then they go sober and you won't even know about it. Like, it's not like they make a big deal about it, and you wouldn't know it by the music output either. I think Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age and Caius back in the day, I don't know that he does a lot of drugs, even though you would expect it kind of from the style of music and the people he hangs out with and everything. So and then people just killing themselves or dying from overdoses. Obviously that's not good. That's not good for your output. So it's I think it's sort of it's a distraction from the idea of people are good at art. When they are good at art, it's about them. It's not about the drugs. Should we abolish individualized clothing and all wear frumpy gray cloaks?
I mean, I would probably be, well, maybe not frumpy in terms of it'd have to be comfortable. But if it was just comfortable, if it was all athleisure for everyone, you just had to basically wear that. Number one, people would complain, and I just wouldn't want to hear them complain, But if they didn't complain, I would just love it. I would just be fine with that. Oh yeah, I don't know. I don't want to. I don't have to overthink that kind of stuff. Just want to, for a lot of that, just buy the 10-pack at Walmart, whatever. Just go on about my day. That's about it.
Yeah, I mean, are we that far away from that, anyways?
Yeah,
at this point. Yeah, I'm kind of the same mind as you.
Do you think, I wonder about this sometimes where the DPRK flag and profile name people, these tend to be people who maybe they're on the alternative type of side of things. They sort of present themselves as being crust punks or whatever subcultural, that they have an investment in that, but they're really interested in these societies that are built on cohesion that's enforced in some way through personal, strongly through personal appearance and through modesty, and not just modesty in your house, but everybody having a sort of flattened experience. And I wonder how much people on some level, because this question, I'm assuming, is coming from that angle, right? Of whether ideologically it makes sense for that to be the case. And I go back and forth on this. I don't really go back and forth because in reality, I'm fine with clothes being the way they are. I wouldn't want hard and fast actual laws around this the type of thing.
Sure.
But it's weird because there is a case to be made for it, basically, like you were saying, Don. But then at the same time, it's you wouldn't ever really want to enforce that, so it's kind of not a real question,
I remember, I think I mentioned this before, but I remember in the early constitutional debates and stuff in the United States, one of the things that they would debate about is whether or not there should be special taxes on, or bans and stuff on things elaborate outfits and stuff, fancy clothes and all that, because it was seen as a liberal move to attack fanciness kind of thing, royalty and nobility. And it was a sort of Puritan kind of thing, I guess, where it's everyone should be wearing plain, simple clothes to show that they're simple before God and all that kind of stuff.
Do you have an idea of when time-wise this was happening?
So in the actual constitutional debates, I know it happened. It was part of it. They wanted to.
Okay.
So it was 1780s, I guess, whatever.
Yeah, because I know there was a thing around the time of the Revolutionary War where people would make their own clothes at home and not buy clothes on the
Yeah,
market because that was
sure.
coming from Britain and stuff. So
Yeah,
like
that
the
might be part
raw
of it too,
materials
yeah.
were produced in
Yeah.
the colonies, sent back to Britain, and then they would have to purchase those produced goods, and they were kind of against that.
But I always think it's funny because I always think that when I always think of that as an example when people sort of talk about the founding fathers being these like extreme libertarians who would never support like the drug war or something like that kind of stuff. And then it's kind of like, yeah, but I just want, it's not that I'm like, I think that there has to be a contradiction there. Like, people can believe all sorts of things together, but I do like the idea of like the Cato Institute or something giving like a speech about like, these dresses at the Oscars are just out of control or something like that. we need to put a special 25% tax on these clothes and use the money to like, I don't know, found libraries or something. So, yeah.
I could like whatever the situation is in the world, I feel like I could find a way to just be fine with it. Like if it was really strict, I would be, it's just not something I care about too much. And then there's like pros and cons to all kinds of different ways that people go about these things. So I think the best attitude is just like, let people do whatever they're doing at a collective scale, right? Like it's whatever. I don't find it like a big issue in terms of oppression or something to like go either way on that, like I don't think it's a big deal if people are wearing fancy stuff if they have the money for it, and I don't think it's a big deal if people aren't allowed to wear certain things. Like it's just not something that factors into my idea of like, am I living a decent life or something? But other people feel differently, and that's fine. And it's whatever. Have new GF. She's fucking gorgeous. Though when we went to the beach some days ago, I was surprised that she had a Sonnenred black sun tattoo over her left shoulder and a huge 1488 on her belly, though she had some neat S runes in each of her shins as well as AKs on her thighs. But yeah, I think she might be one of those National Socialists. Should I dump her, dear Tom and Don? Yeah, sounds like she might be into that stuff or might have gone to prison or something. That sounds... I don't know. Like, leaving even the ideological stuff aside, people get all kinds of tattoos and it doesn't mean anything necessarily about their lifestyle. Like, they might be some ad executive or something. But, like, this seems like somebody that might... Even if you can kind of deal with all that kind of stuff, it might be inviting trouble in some kind of form or fashion, No, just kind of ringing a few bells for me, like meth addiction or an ex who is a biker or something that might decide like, hey, you got my girl, kind of a thing. I don't know.
No, I say stick with it and
okay,
talk through it, and if you end up agreeing with her, then that's what you agree with now, and that's just the way that life works. And sometimes love's takes you strange places, but you should embrace it.
Well, leave it to the Ukrainian to say something like that. What do you think, Tiago?
I'll side with Don on this one. Give her a shot, have some civil discourse about it. She could be a fan of history or something of that nature,
Yeah, or Buddhism or something. I guess she doesn't have swastikas, so I don't know. All right, let's see. If non-Muslims are not allowed in Mecca, why should non-Jews be allowed in Jerusalem or non-Catholics in Rome?
In Catholicism, non-Muslims are allowed in Mecca. I don't know what the problem is.
So there's a few issues with this question, I think. I think we need to say not Rome, but the Vatican. Because Rome is like, I don't know. Rome itself is not the holy site, right? Like, or the holy city in the same sense as Mecca is. Although there's also like not any specific injunctions in either Judaism or Catholicism around the city, and that's the case with Islam and Mecca. So it's not an issue of like, I don't think that you need to like just adopt a kind of a mirror position on it. And the thing with Jerusalem is like that's everybody's city in a sense. Like that's Christians, Jews, and Muslims all hold it to be very important and stuff. So I don't know why you would just kind of automatically give it to Jews here.
This actually brings up a couple of questions for me about that I hadn't considered about Mecca because, first of all, so the whole, you might have just said this, the whole city is not accessible to non-Muslims, or it's only...
Well, okay, so there's sort of a matter of how do you define the city, and that seems pretty flexible. And I'm really not versed on all the ins and outs of this, but there's an idea of like a sacred space that is considered like, okay, so if we say that the city of Mecca, like if the city limits expand, do those expanded areas now get counted? Because previously people would be able to be in those areas, and now like it's part of the city. Does that matter, or do we go by the original boundaries, or is it like a specific part of the city? And I think it's actually the case that it is like a specific definition of the city, because I'm pretty sure that you can walk around like just on a regular street in the city itself if you're a non-Muslim. So yeah, I guess I'm just not knowledgeable enough about that particular issue, but definitely in terms of like the area of the Kaaba and that whole thing, like that is specifically to like only for Muslims according to the law.
Has that historically been the case?
Yeah, that was something that came from the Prophet.
Okay, like in a hadith, or is that an actual?
Yeah,
I don't mean to grill you on this. I just wasn't
it's fine.
Even aware of that.
I don't remember if it's from the Quran or from a hadith, but it's something that was like established during the time of the Prophet and then continued on from there. And I think it's sort of like you back that up with either sunnah, like, which means from hadith, or from Quran or something like that.
So this is going to possibly tread into similar territory to the question about Shia versus Sunni from the last episode. But now I'm curious because there's all sorts of, like I was reading about like the Assad families, like the type of, I don't want to call it syncretic because I can't claim to know too much about this, but there's all sorts of strains of like Islam where you have authorities that extend beyond even what you would expect in Shia Islam. Is there like, how are cutoffs established for like Muslim versus not Muslim for things like this? Like, you get what I'm asking, right?
Yeah, sure. So that's kind of why Shia pilgrims on Hajj are harassed, is because of the Saudi government's like very strict definition around Shias, like being whether they are Muslim or not. And I don't think that they have like an official position about that I am aware of. But there's like a grand mufti, and there's like a council of muftis that I think determine these sorts of things. And I think you have to go on an individual basis. So that's why it's not just like anyone from Iran is not allowed kind of a thing. So it's sort of like they have to find out somehow that your beliefs put you outside of the fold of Islam, and they have like a pretty strict definition of that. As far as like the Assad family, they're Alawi, which I mean, the thing about their belief system is that it's secret. So you can't, like, the authorities in that religion they just don't tell you what they actually believe. But it's understood to be pretty far from like Islamic beliefs. They have, and the thing is, you can't speak about this in a general way or in some sort of like, well, this is what the main tenets are, because again, it's secret. But from just kind of Wikipedia type research, they hold things like, and there's different people, and there's different branches, and there's different kind of beliefs floating around. But like Ali being God, or some sort of like a avatar of God, that kind of a thing. And there's a sense of Muhammad and Ali and somebody else like forming sort of like a trinity of God sort of a thing in three different people. Like it's very, I think syncretic is a very good way to define it, because it really seems to be the case, but it's just hard to say.
Yeah, that's part of what I was asking. I also have this like Wikipedia level knowledge of just reading about it and thinking like, Jesus, this doesn't sound, I mean, this sounds pretty far off from most people's idea of like what being a Muslim is. Not to invalidate it per se, but I mean, if if that's true.
I don't even
Because
know if
there's
they
also-
necessarily identify as Muslims half the time. That's the thing. Like, people get really touchy about, like, oh, you can't just say people are non-Muslim. Like, that's a, anytime Sunnis sort of like define their beliefs and then like there's a group that is excluded from that, it becomes like this big, like, oh, you're bigots and stuff. But I think, like, there is a line. Like, you have to be able to define your belief system, and at a certain point, like, some people are on the other side of that line. So yeah, I think if you're calling anything but God, I think that kind of puts you outside of that. So I don't know if that's what they're about, then I would be hard pressed to like kind of say that counts as Islam. But yeah, but like I said, I don't even know if they identify as Muslim. I think it's one of the one of these issues where it's like there may be people who come from that background and they have pretty typical sort of Islamic beliefs, but they just happen to be from that sort of thing, and they're maybe not super interested in their particular sect's like theology, and they may have like just a simple belief and like, yep, there's God and there's Muhammad and that's about it, and then, well, that would make you Muslim. So
yeah. And also, to get back to the original question, I mean, it's not like there was long periods of history where I'm sure that the Catholic Church had a very strong view that Muslims were not supposed to be in Rome and stuff like that, or whatever. Like,
it's true. Yeah.
I don't think it was like. I feel like it's a very and I would even go like lean against the Vatican is not. It wasn't that it was just the Vatican. I mean, for that period, probably it was all of Rome, and not just that, but like Christendom or something. So.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's why I always joke about this kind of stuff too, where I say like, we should have a year of peace, and then what we'll do is we'll build a mosque in Vatican City, like a Jewish temple, like a synagogue, and then and in each place, and then I always say, and then we can build a synagogue and church in like a cathedral in Mecca. But I always like, dress it up in like flowery language and stuff. Like, this will bring the year of peace or something like that. It's like, yeah, well, obviously it wouldn't bring the year of peace because like everyone would get mad. And not only that, but I mean, even just to say is that Jerusalem, the idea that it's everyone's city is a nice thought. But obviously it's not. It's right now. It's not like everyone's city in the way that. Parts of it are inaccessible to a lot of people and stuff like that. So
yeah. I mean,
like
Jerusalem has gone through ups and downs in that regard.
Sure.
I like the idea of this Abrahamic unification taking place in a Year of Luigi style event.
Yeah.
What's funny about that idea, Don, is I think that violates Sharia on the level of building a mosque in the Vatican. I don't think you're allowed to build mosques to replace or to kind of like dominate over other religions, kind of like places of worship and stuff like that. And also building non-Islamic places of worship in Mecca, I don't think that's allowed either. This gets into territory where this doesn't concern me. I'm not building things, so I don't really know all the ins and outs. But that might be the case.
Well, also, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, and our former guest Khalid probably knows a lot too. The one from Berlin or whatever. The minaret politics and stuff like that seems to have turned into a weird thing in places like Switzerland and stuff, where they're trying to ban it all the time, and this idea that like any sort of tower, is like somehow, I don't know. It's a funny kind of thing where it gets into that, where it's like they're trying to colonize us with these minarets, or as if they're like giving off radiation or something. 5G.
The call to prayer, people act like it's some sort of like war cry or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, I think we covered this one pretty well here. The world is ending. The true religion ends up being Shinto. What would you do? So what is Shinto about? Isn't it sort of some sort of like animistic thing? Like everything has some kind of like spirit that you need to respect in some way, something like that?
Yeah, I think it's spirit based and like ancestor based and stuff like that. So I don't know.
Well, hopefully my ancestors and the spirits are happy with me, I guess. I don't know. I feel like if that kind of thing was true and all like the Abrahamic sort of line of thought was just completely made up or whatever, I don't know if that would like land me in trouble. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I have been a good Muslim or you've been a good Christian or whatever it is, and you're like being good in the world and everything, like I feel like all the spirits and ancestors would be pleased with that. I don't know. I don't know if they have like hell and judgment and all that kind of stuff.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I feel like it's probably to some extent something like we've talked about with Hinduism in the past too, where like it consolidated into like world religion kind of thing in the last probably few hundred years, where before that it was just like traditional beliefs that a lot of people held, and then it became like a state thing in the last period kind of thing.
Yeah,
I don't know. So
I read a funny thing about Japan the other day, is that you are it's like you're born non-religious, you marry as a Christian, and you die as a Buddhist, because apparently Japanese weddings are really modeled on like a Western style Christian wedding. Like they wear Western sort of clothes, like the like the wedding dress and all that kind of stuff. They do that in the Christian fashion for some reason. And then older people tend to turn to Buddhism when they kind of, as people kind of get more religious and stuff in their old age.
One of the things that I did in China that was cool was we went to this island. I think it's called Putuoshan or something. And it's just like this island that's got like this mountain and stuff on it. And it's like Buddhist stuff, like all this like giant statues that look like gold and stuff. Probably just, gold plate or whatever. I don't know. But like, and then there's like a monastery there with like its thing. And they, the monks are all walking around and stuff. And it's kind of cool. And like, but it is interesting. You just see so many people that like, I think that there's like this thing where, it's people see compatibility between beliefs and stuff that sort of more rigorous, angry atheist people in the West might not see as compatible. Like someone might not believe that there's a God kind of thing, but then might believe that there's somehow their ancestors are somehow influencing them or whatever. And, I don't know. So I think that was an interesting experience for me at the time, because at the time I was like a diehard Dawkins kind of guy. And it was nice to walk around at night, around all these monks and stuff. So, yeah.
It seems like even in the West, people who are putatively agnostic, well, then I have some way of reconciling that with odd received ideas of, if not around ancestry in a sort of like rough way, you know what I mean? Like they have some type of like quasi spiritual beliefs that go beyond the sense that there's an energy or whatever. Like they might have some sort of like layover, and it doesn't necessarily have to connect to like a larger, I don't know, like structured way of thinking about these things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is kind of like a poem that someone wrote, sort of a thing. Gonna take a plane. Mother's afraid of flying. Should I just drug her? So I have taken like a really long flight before and popped like a Vicodin before, and it went. It was a very smooth ride. It was a very comfortable, easy ride. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's a little bit different now, just with all the, having to wear a mask and all that, and people.
Right, that might be where the fear is coming from.
Yeah, and no, but yeah, I don't know. I that's probably a good idea, anyways. Just I don't know. I mean, if she's up for it, I say go for it. Don't do it against her will, or like inject her with like a lot or whatever. Yeah.
Ari Shaffir style dosing of people, please. Where approve of that. But and also, I wouldn't go to the extent of like chloroform or whatever. Yeah. Like offer her something to calm her nerves that isn't gonna like completely, use some moderation. But I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah, it's really like Klonopin, Vicodin, whatever, all those sorts of, I think is Vicodin a benzo, but like all those sort of like basic anti-anxiety drugs, I think will be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Vicodin is a painkiller, just like an opioid.
Mm. When I was very green in my when I was very new to smoking pot, I think the first time I ever tried an edible was before I went on a plane, just out of like some idea of how such a thing should turn out, and that was really unpleasant. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, you could introduce her to You Can't Win. It's like pleasant chats and stuff. And
Yeah.
you might relax during the whole flight or whatever, you know. Afterwards, you can take it off and be like, I'd like to talk to you about Pizzagate. I just got some new information about this. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay, so we'll wrap it up with these last two here. So this is just like a comment on my anti-Slavic racism. Muslim Tom's anti-Slavic racism is atrocious, and it shows. Well, what do you think, Don? You're Slav, and we do this every week.
No, I think it's great that we're getting a new audience with insightful commentators and interesting things that I'm putting Tom on probation on this. So if not, then he might want to take a step back, and we can get like maybe a more Russian host or something like that could take his place. So.
And one of the things about I mean, because there's definitely a lot of anti-Slav sentiment coming from Tom on this pod, but then when that then people start to hear these dialogues around Slavs building the pyramids, etc., and then that kind of gets them, they want to investigate that more, and then they see sort of the truth around some of these claims. So it's like, I mean,
yeah,
that can lead to a positive dialogue too.
Sure. Yeah. Teach the controversy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's finish with this one. It says, this actually seems like a sincere question. When I first read it, I thought it was a joke, but it says, is looking at porn ever not sinful or haram? I've heard some admittedly flimsy sounding justifications using the hadith about the guy not doing ghusl because he'd die. Otherwise, are some forms of pornography less sinful than others? Like, is hentai or say written erotica better? Or is it all just offensive to God? Thanks. I don't think you can ever just say like, oh, it's actually fine. There are some like edge cases where certain things are permissible because like it would like there was a sort of I assume this is a hypothetical situation where someone couldn't stop themselves from like they were about to rape someone out of just like they were just going crazy and were unable to like stop themselves from doing it unless they masturbated. So in that case, that would be not only permissible, but it would be obligatory for them to do so because that would stop them from committing like a greater sin, right? So that's very much an edge case, right? We're talking about this is a way of preventing a rape. So I assume that this person is not in that kind of a situation. So I would not go around trying to find ways to justify looking at porn. I think we all kind of understand that you're not supposed to be looking at people, you're not even supposed to be seeing someone's hair unless they're someone in your family or like your spouse. You know what I mean? So like, I think that porn is clearly beyond acceptability in that regard. And yeah, I don't know. It just seems like kind of an obvious thing to me that maybe some forms are less sinful than others, but it's still, we're talking about, is it 99 points of sin or is it 95 points of sin? That kind of thing.
What was this hadith about? Like a guy, he had either
I'm
he
not
looks
sure.
at porn or he dies or something.
So he referred to something, a guy not doing ghusl because he died. So ghusl is like, before Muslims pray, we have to do a kind of a washing thing, and that's wudu. And ghusl is something that you have to do after certain things. So sex is one of those things, or ejaculation. And that is just it's basically like a full shower or a bath. Like you have to completely submerge yourself in water for it to kind of be a complete.
Did this
ghusl.
before or after?
After.
Okay.
So it's similar to the wudu, except that it's a little bit more extensive. And it's not only for sex, it's for other things as well. But I'm not sure what this hadith is about where he couldn't do it because he would die. I think I have heard about issues where you, like if you have some kind of wound or some kind of medical issue where if you were to do a ghusl that would like do harm to you in some way, that you are exempt from that. And that's generally the way like Sharia works. Like there's sort of a a situational kind of understanding to like, there's like priorities, right? Like preserving religion and preserving your life are at the very top there. So just because it's like, well, this is the norm, you have to do this after in a certain situation, that doesn't mean that like if doing so would kill you, then you still need to do it. Like there's context, right? But I can't see any situation where it's like, well, it's actually fine to look at pornography because of some weird thing like that. It's not. It's just bad for your like spiritual development. You know what I mean? This is what I generally hear scholars and imams and stuff talking about. Like it's very like distracting. Like you kind of get focused on weird things. You start thinking about other people in ways that you shouldn't be thinking about. Like it's not the right approach to sex and that kind of aspect of our lives.
I don't know if it's like a meme thing because it's something I saw only on Twitter, and like that's the kind of thing that I have no idea if it's true or not, but people usually say that it's like was the opposite sort of historically from the way that this question is premised within Catholicism, where some like a lot of the times people would justify visiting prostitutes because they would say that it would prevent them from masturbating, which was the greater sin.
Yeah,
and that's kind of it's kind of a theory that people kind of put out there, and I don't know. It seems like kind of a bizarre strategy, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I do think that existed. Like I think this is really fuzzy in my memory, but I remember learning about something like there was like church funded brothels because of the clergy or something, like to kind of like give them a vent,
yeah.
So I don't know, obviously the way that this is handled in Catholicism is going to be different. I imagine that people are probably not advocating for that kind of thing, and the church wouldn't try to justify that kind of a policy today. But
yeah,
probably in those days it was even like not on the up and up. It was probably a little bit kind of on the shady side. But
sure.
I mean, that situation has existed in a Muslim context as well, where people have kind of arranged things like that, where it's not really what the religion would have you be doing, but that's what people have gotten up to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. This is something that people struggle with a lot. It's something of a kind of a big topic of discussion amongst Muslims, is like the issue of pornography, and I don't think you want to be finding ways to justify it. Basically, that's kind of how I feel about this. That being said, like I also don't think you should don't get too torn up about it if you do end up like looking at it, or if you have some sort of like issue with this, because there's it's a lot more common than you might think if you're someone who comes from a conservative family, and it's something that you kind of have this idea of it's like some really huge sin. I'm not trying to say that it's okay, but it's a lot more common that you think. It's not really hurting other people in the way that a lot of other things do. So don't kill yourself, don't get too torn up about it, but at the same time, like, you don't want to be finding ways to kind of justify it. I think you should be able to kind of figure things out in some way, and understand that sometimes it takes a long time to sort those kind of things out too. So, as long as you're making a good effort, I think you can kind of rest easy on that and know that, God recognizes your efforts, and it's not necessarily about being perfect. It's about trying to do the right thing.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll end it there, I guess. Thanks for coming on, Tiago. I really enjoyed our conversation about crypto and stuff. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks, Tiago. Okay, guys, so if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like a second episode of You Can't Win every week, you can subscribe to our Patreon, and you will get access to that, as well as our Discord, where you can chat with us in our community. And don't forget that you can submit anonymous questions to our Curious Cat, and the link for that is pinned to the podcast Twitter account. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.